The agreement between the United States and Iran was signed and concluded, with President Trump personally signing it himself. So, what happened after it was signed? Well, within a day, there was an outpouring of criticism. People were saying things like it was a national humiliation and a disgrace, and even Trump's longtime allies were sharply critical. So, what's really going on here? Today, I, Feng Wei, want to explain the core of this issue to you. I think by now, everything about it should be pretty clear from all sides, so I hope to lay it out plainly, and then we can see what everyone thinks, okay? Also, by the way, Trump's birthday and Xi Jinping's birthday are just one day apart. Trump's is June 14th, and Xi Jinping's is June 15th. But how can just one day apart make such a world of difference? Xi Jinping mentioned a birthday gift that infuriated him. Meanwhile, for the first time, Ukraine launched a massive airstrike on Moscow, deploying 200 drones. When I saw this news, it really reminded me of World War II, when Colonel Doolittle from the United States led the B-25 bombers to bomb Tokyo. So is the tide of the war really about to turn? Hello to all our YouTube viewers and greetings to all the listeners of Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Today's episode is a bit late, but let's make the most of our time and quickly talk about today's news. All right, so first, let's talk about President Trump. Last night at the Palace of Versailles in France, he signed the US-Iran peace memorandum, which contains a total of 14 points. At the same time, just a few hours later, Iran's President Pezeshkian also signed it in Tehran, so both sides didn't need to meet face-to-face. They didn't need to meet in Geneva to complete this countersigning process, so the signing happened 2 days earlier than the originally expected Friday. Why is that? Why is that? Well, originally, the digital signing was done last Sunday, right? After the signing, the US side was supposed to announce it, but Iran said, no, let's announce it on Friday. So what was the reason? Vice President Vance said he didn't know, and we don't know who wanted that or why they did it, but out of respect for Iran, we just said Friday it is and agreed to it. So that's why the US held on to the agreement and didn't release it for 3 days. Vance said, we're a democratic country. We don't hide things or cover things up. Once it's signed, we show it to everyone. But because Iran requested it, that's the only reason it wasn't shown to everyone right away. Vance said, maybe it's because they need to translate it into Persian and then compare it back and forth with the English version, which takes time. But that's just him trying to come up with a possible reason on behalf of Iran. But in my opinion, it's because Iran signed something like this, so they need internal discussions and have to come up with some version to fool their own people. Anyway, with the information blockade inside the country, ordinary people don't really know what's actually going on. So that's why this week, we actually saw two versions, right? The 14-point agreement from inside Iran, they're all made up, honestly. That's just my guess. Anyway, whatever the case, in the end, yesterday, Wednesday, Trump signed, and then the other signed at a different time. They didn't have to meet in person, which was also Iran's idea. So yesterday, they moved the signing up to this Wednesday. What's the reason? Who knows? Anyway, Vance is just like, who knows? Sometimes he's anti-Iran, sometimes he's not. In short, it doesn't really matter when the US announces it. Announcing it earlier is better than later. That's basically the reason behind last night's signing at Versailles. All right, so the current situation is that the Strait of Hormuz has already reopened for navigation, and the first batch of cruise ships has set sail. Iran has 3 giant cruise ships that have already left the Strait of Hormuz. And what about Qatar? 5 giant cruise ships are currently heading to Qatari ports. So right now, stock prices are going up and oil prices are going down. As for U.S. crude oil, West Texas Intermediate crude has dropped by 1.25% to $75.80 per barrel. This is data from about 2 hours ago, so I won't check for updates right now. Anyway, Brent crude oil from the UK dropped by 1.4%, reaching $78.40. Oil prices are still higher than they were before the war because before the war it was around $70. But it's already getting pretty close. Then President Trump tweeted that oil is flowing, Iran will cannot have nuclear weapons, and the world will be safe. Stocks are soaring, employment has reached record levels, and prices are going down. So our country is stronger, safer, and more respected than ever before. And at the end, he added a bit of attitude. You are welcome. What he meant was, you haven't even thanked me yet, so I'll just say you're welcome for you. All right, now let's take another look at what the highlights of the agreement are. Indeed, after the agreement was announced, it faced strong criticism. Why is that? Because the wording of the agreement is completely one-sided. Before this, as we all know, everyone who watches Feng Wei's program has seen me mention that Vice President Vance appeared on all the major mainstream media shows in the US within 30 hours. He even wanted to go on Fox's late night comedy shows to explain the reasoning and content of the US Iran agreement. Vance actually had a cold just a week ago, and after appearing on so many shows, he ended up losing his voice. Just like me, Feng Wei. Anyway, basically, all the key points Vance made in his speeches, because I watched almost all of them, I saw every single point he raised. But the key points? After watching all of Vance's speeches, I realized they don't really match up with the actual text of the agreement. Why's that? Let me explain. Vance's presentations have clear content and underlying logic. First, it's about mutually lifting the blockade of the strait, right? Second, it's about giving Iran the benefits it wants, including lifting sanctions, unfreezing assets, reconstruction funds, and so on. Iran's actions will be used to assess the situation, right? Whether Iran gets the next benefit depends on its performance. If their behavior isn't good, we'll stop immediately. Also, the 60-day period is just a baseline. It's a strict bottom line. We will strictly manage this timeline and won't let them drag things out. And about the $300 billion, the US government won't pay a single cent. Also, if Iran doesn't comply with the agreement, we'll go back and bomb them. Trump has always said that if we're going to sign, it has to be a good deal. Otherwise, we won't sign at all. But Rubio has also been saying that we can't let Iran charge fees for the Strait of Hormuz, otherwise for these global choke points. If 5 or 6 straits all start charging fees, what are we supposed to do, right? Wouldn't that change the entire global shipping order? Okay. But even with all these clear stances, if you look at the agreement itself, you can hardly see any of that reflected in it. Okay, first of all, the text shows that these 60 days aren't as strictly enforced as Vance said. They can be changed at any time during the 60 days and can keep being changed. When the 60 days are up, it just says we can extend it, and that's it. Secondly, it says that Iran can't charge fees within the 60 days, but it seems like after the 60 days, they might be able to charge fees. So the language in the document basically says that Iran, Oman, and the Gulf countries should work things out among themselves. In other words, it gives Iran the leeway to charge fees. This is another thing that makes a lot of people frown. Of course, the thing that makes people frown the most is the core issue itself. This so-called principle of rewarding based on performance, where is it actually reflected? Honestly, you can't really find it. Of course, maybe it's just vague, hidden in the details of the wording. For example, there's a line that says, to terminate all types of sanction in agreed upon schedule, which means ending all kinds of sanctions in a mutually agreed manner. So does mutually agreed refer to what we just talked about, that so-called rewarding based on performance? It's all about mutual agreement. Also, there's another line, make fully available for use frozen or restricted funds, mutually agree on the procedure related to, and so on. What does that mean? Anyway, in Chinese, it just means handling things according to a mutually agreed approach. This refers to the release of frozen funds. In other words, rewarding based on performance is actually hidden behind the words mutually agreed. If you want to put it that way, that's fine. It's not like you can't say it, but the question is, why isn't it made more explicit? If you can say it out loud, why not write it down? Why be so vague and just use the phrase mutually agreed? Some people can't help but ask, is it because they're afraid Iran won't sign if you write it out in a way that makes Iran look so happy? Are you just trying to trick them into agreeing by making it all one-sided in their favor, afraid they won't sign otherwise? Okay, so the main text is basically about lifting sanctions, the US lifting sanctions, the US unfreezing assets, and the US providing reconstruction funds, those few things. So because of this chapter of the agreement, this document, has been heavily criticized. All right, so now, but the language is one thing, right? The language is one thing, and maybe there's something hidden behind this mutual agreement. The key issue is whether what Vance says actually counts, because this agreement has already shown a different situation. So how will it actually be implemented? After all these negotiations, does what Vance said, after running back and forth for 30 hours, really hold any weight? So what was the result? Today, Vice President Vance went to the White House at noon and held a press conference that lasted 47 minutes. I watched all the explanations and Q&A in full. So what's really going on? Vice President Vance reiterated everything he said in the media, without any changes at all. I won't go over every single detail, but I'll highlight the main points. Let's start with the first key point. Vance once again repeated that this matter is a win-win for the United States. He said, I don't know if Iran will truly change its ways. If they don't change, we'll keep sanctioning them. But if they do, wouldn't the world be a better place? Why shouldn't we give Iran a chance? That's what Vance said. Then a reporter asked, hey, what about ballistic missiles in this issue? As for the so-called assistance to proxies issue, neither this nor the ballistic missile issue was mentioned at all in the so-called MO, that is, the memorandum. Obviously, everyone could see that. If it's not even mentioned, then clearly the US has given up on it and isn't making any demands in this area. Vance said, we haven't given up. He said President Trump cannot deprive Iran of its right to self-defense. Israel can have missiles, so of course Iran can have missiles too. How can you not allow a normal country to have missiles? But Iran can't have so many ballistic missiles, so many that it would destabilize the region. That's what he said. As for proxies, he said that if Iran continues to fund proxies, then we won't give them any benefits, and that would also count as a violation of the agreement. Then a reporter asked, so what are the standards? How do you know if the money you give ends up with the proxies? And Vance just said, yes. Taking everything into account, for example, we can observe Iran's flow of funds. I just don't know how he's so confident. Can the US really see all of Iran's financial movements? Even though you control the international, financial system. The financial system. How do you know they can't transfer money? Maybe Zhongshan gives it to Li Si gives it to Wang Wei, and then Zhao Lu passes it along. I don't know, I haven't really looked into this. Because Iran is under sanctions right now, even though they have money, there's really nothing they can do with it. If they want to convert it to US dollars, they can't just go to a bank and withdraw it. No bank will give them US cash. All right, anyway, the reporter's question was basically, you say Iran isn't cooperating, so you won't give them the money. But what does not cooperating mean? What's the standard? President Vance said it's a comprehensive assessment. For example, if they don't let us inspect their nuclear facilities, maybe they say it's okay, but then don't actually allow it. Or if we find suspicious financial flows or problematic transactions. Or if we discover Iran has started developing advanced centrifuges, the kind that spin to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. When things like this happen, what do? If we feel something's wrong at that point, we'll impose sanctions or even take military action. That's what it means. Vance also said that Iran's nuclear program has already been destroyed, that it's been destroyed and buried underground. He's talking about what happened last June. The result was caused by remote B-2 bombers. He said the goal of the US government is to prevent Iran from regaining this capability, not just for 1 or 2 years, but for many, many years. Okay, then a reporter asked, now that you've reopened the strait and let Iran sell oil and they're making $500 million a day, what if they use that money to develop nuclear weapons? What will you do then? Vance said, first of all, when it comes to oil embargoes have never really worked. What he said is actually true. I've told you all this before, right? Because Iran uses shadow tankers to transport oil, and that's how they've always done it. It's just that the direction of the shipments, well, the countries willing to risk US sanctions to buy oil from these shadow tankers are basically the Chinese Communist Party. So the CCP buys 80% of Iran's oil, but they buy it at a discounted price. But now, if the oil embargo is lifted, China might not be able to buy it anymore, because now Iran's oil will go to whoever pays the highest price. If they sell the oil and get the money back to develop nuclear weapons, then what? When reporters ask questions, you have to remember that Iran has 90 million people. If we bombed them for 40 days, even if they lost $1 trillion in assets, it wouldn't be enough. So right now, there are gaps everywhere. The economy has hit rock bottom, and even $5 trillion a day isn't enough for such a big country. They don't have the money to build nuclear weapons. That was his answer. What do you think? Do you think it makes sense? In addition, a reporter asked about the $300 billion. What's going on with that? $300 billion, huh? Vance reiterated once again that the US government won't pay a single cent. This money is coming from the Gulf countries and private individuals. Actually, some viewers asked about this yesterday, so that's what it means. How did he put it again? Let's put the subtitles up for this part. Yeah, that's right. This is from someone called Photo Club said this. Iran isn't the US, nor is it a Gulf country. If you're going to put together a fund to invest, it really feels more like a private investment project. What does Iran have that's worth a $300 billion investment? Right, exactly. Honestly, it's just a private investment project, plain and simple. So what does Iran have that's worth investing $300 billion or $350 billion in? Of course it has something. Oil, obviously. As everyone knows, Iran's natural gas reserves are the second largest in the world, only behind Saudi Arabia. Natural gas, right? As for oil, Venezuela is number 1, and for natural gas, Saudi Arabia is first and Iran is second. That's the situation. But the problem is they can't extract it. As you know, Iran's technology for refining natural gas, as well as for oil extraction and refining, is all outdated. Because they've been sanctioned by the West, it's like how American oil companies can go into Venezuela and immediately start making money. American companies can make money, and Venezuela can make money too. Similarly, if American companies went into Iran, both sides would make a lot of money. So there's definitely room for that. Now, the second thing. What's the second issue? Let me think. What was I saying? Where was I going with this? Let's bring up the second question and take a look, okay? So this is from Charles Wang, who said, if the $300 billion doesn't need to come from the US, why include it in the agreement? Is Trump guaranteeing it? You're right, it really doesn't need to come from the US. To put it plainly, it's just a private equity fund, an investment fund. So why did Trump put it in? In my opinion, it's just to paint a big picture, to make it look attractive. 300 billion? Shouldn't that be a bigger deal? It's not just hype, is it? If the US wants to help Iran find that money, Trump just needs to call a few major US oil companies because they'd be more than happy to get in and make money. So Trump can actually deliver on this promise. But this kind of talk is really, really tempting for Iran. You know, I've said this before, or rather, we all think this way. Most people do. Asking Iran to give up nuclear weapons? That's a joke. Why would they ever give them up? That's their lifeline for competing with the West. Trump's 300 billion is tempting, but this isn't about the US government. It's about the GCC, the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries aren't involved or obligated, but Trump must find a way to bring in $300 billion in investment. Okay, so the simplest way is to look for American oil companies. Okay, right, so in that case, also, there's another thing. A viewer mentioned this. Let's take a look. Zhang Guang said that all major private enterprises' investments must clearly specify that they're limited to non-military projects. If they don't have approval from the beautiful country, that is the United States, otherwise military investments could be hidden within these investment sectors. But honestly, that's not very likely. Before investment, unlike Chinese companies, these aren't just public-private partnerships. They're military-civilian dual use. That applies to Chinese firms, but it's very difficult for a foreign company to become dual use in China. So why should foreign companies listen to you? If you try to force me, I'll just leave, right? So that's not really an issue. This 300 billion in investment is basically all in energy. I think it's mainly energy equipment. Besides natural gas, it might also include oil, refineries, oil extraction, oil wells, and possibly other related things as well. Or maybe power plants or oil-fired power plants, things like that, those are possible too. So if you're talking about these things being used for military purposes, that's still not possible. What I mean is, if you invest 300 billion, is Iran going to use it to make ballistic missiles? That's impossible. Biden says massive funding and integration promote peace, but that's far-fetched. How does spending money help? It hurts the West and helps Iran. In a future conflict, they'll just nationalize and confiscate your assets. This is just like what happened in Venezuela with Chavez, the dictator before Maduro. He came to power through elections in 1999, and it's very likely he got there by buying votes, not by cheating. After he was elected, he nationalized all the American oil companies in Venezuela in one go. So if you pour in a huge amount of investment, how could that possibly work out? For investors, I think it's a risk. They don't really benefit from it. These investors are putting their hard-earned money in, supposedly for the sake of peace, but who would actually be interested in that? So anyway, I think that's a bit of a summary, but after listening to everything Vance said, after hearing him out, I feel like what Vance said sounds reliable. But in the end, is all of this really reliable? Was it put into writing? The reporter asked right there on the spot, basically meaning, VP, what if after you say all this, Iran doesn't acknowledge it? Do you have it in writing? So basically, we should look at actions, not words. He said the written part isn't important. There's no need to put it in writing. We just keep it in mind for when the time comes. As long as it's implemented, that's enough. So what that means is after that, they would continue the talks. Then right there, the reporter asked, who's leading the negotiations? Are you the main negotiator? Vance said, I'm the main negotiator. All right, so basically, Vance did two rounds, what I'd call a road show, almost like a stock road show. He went on a whirlwind tour to all the media outlets to explain what's really behind this agreement. Then, once the agreement was released, everyone saw it and realized it was completely one sided. None of the things he talked about were actually in there. So today, Vance came out again to repeat himself, saying, even though it's not written in there, what I said is exactly how it is. He made an effort to explain it all over again, and then he finally said, I was the lead negotiator. For these 60 days, he was the lead negotiator. So this whole thing is definitely tied to Vance now, that's for sure. But in a way, that's a good thing, right? Because he made this promise. He's not going to go back on his word. He'll definitely negotiate in this direction, won't he? All right, so up to now, this whole thing, this peace agreement that sparked so much controversy, what's really going on with it? What's really happening behind the scenes? Let me share my thoughts with you. Yesterday, I talked to everyone about this. The title yesterday was Good Trump, Bad Trump. Oh, and I said it was kind of imitating Robert Kiyosaki. Actually, that book isn't called Good Dad, Bad Dad. It's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I called it Good Dad, Bad Dad. In the US, there's the saying, good cop, bad cop. Usually, you get someone to play the good cop and someone else to play the bad cop. In Chinese, we call it red face, white face. So when it comes to Trump, I call it good Trump and bad Trump. Right now, Trump is playing the good Trump. He's already knocked Iran down. Even though Iran hasn't surrendered, they've been beaten badly. Then Trump reaches out and says, I'll give you a way out. As long as you don't have nuclear weapons, I'll give you anything. I'll give you $24 billion in frozen assets, or sometimes he even says $100 billion, and sometimes $200 billion. He says he can give it all. Jangbo made it clear, and a reporter asked, there was a Fox News reporter, and he asked, would you really give Iran $150 billion? About those frozen assets, Trump said, yes, of course I would. That's their money. How could we not give it back? He made it sound very reasonable, and a lot of people were convinced. You know, he used to make fun of Obama for sending $1.7 billion to Iran on a Boeing 757. Do you know what that money actually was? Actually, that was also Iran's money. It was money the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had paid the US to buy fighter jets. Then, after the coup, after the Iranian Revolution happened, of course the planes were never delivered, right? So Obama returned the money Iran had paid for the planes, but because of sanctions against Iran, the payment couldn't just be wired over. That's why they gathered up all the cash from banks in Virginia and Maryland, and in the end put together several huge bundles of green bills. These big bundles of cash were flown to Iran on a Boeing 757, but really it was Iran's own money. Now he's given them $150 billion, which is also Iran's money, so really it's all the same thing. But anyway, no matter how you look at it, Trump has actually been very generous to the Iranian regime. Okay, so let's say it again. Why would Iran give up its nuclear weapons, right? That's their lifeline. They're not going to give it up easily. But now, because Trump is unfreezing all their assets, lifting sanctions, and giving them $300 billion, whether it's a real promise or just talk, it's a huge deal. So, at the very least, the three proposals have been put in writing. With all these benefits given to Iran, they might even think, after getting all these perks, I can still secretly work on nuclear weapons, as long as the other side doesn't see it, right? So, why wouldn't they take this deal? There are just too many advantages. This MOU, this memorandum, is written way too much in Iran's favor, so Iran agreed to it. At least, that's what I think. So basically, it was about luring Iran out to sign this agreement. That's what I think. That's what I believe. So Trump was actually very clear-headed about this. He was playing another role, which is the good Trump. After playing the role of bad Trump, he now turns into good Trump. To put it in a very common saying, it's like hitting someone with a stick and then patting them on the head. What that means is you need to remember who's the boss here. I can hit you, but I can also give you benefits. So from now on, you better remember to behave. Okay, so in response to all this widespread criticism of Trump, Trump fired back with a post on Truth Social, harshly scolding them. He said, if you're criticizing me, it's because you're jealous. Either jealous because I pushed the stock market up and brought oil prices down, or you're jealous, or you're just stupid, or you're just bad. It's either stupidity or malice. He just fired back at them. Honestly, I have to say, I think Trump's words are way too harsh. There's really no need to go that far, no need to insult people like that. But that's just how Trump talks and acts. That's his style. Okay, as for Trump, I really think he intentionally gave out a lot of benefits. What he meant was to hit them with a stick and then pat them on the head to try to tame Iran. Yeah, generally speaking, I think for most people, this approach can work. You can tame them like this. This method is really, really, how should I put it, very effective. But for a theocratic regime like Iran, an evil regime like that, can it really be persuaded? What do y'all think? Huh? All right, let's talk about Vance again. Vance really doesn't want the US to go out and overthrow regimes. He's a vice president, or rather a political figure, who puts America first in everything, or that's his philosophy. On the other hand, the military actions led by Rubio and Hagseth, as everyone knows, about a month ago, things actually reached a stalemate, so this path is very difficult. The US can't send troops to occupy and bear huge sacrifices, but if they don't send troops and only rely on bombing, they can't force the Iranian regime to change its ways. So what should they do? So basically, this path is hard to take. Then, turning back, Vance suggests that we try the path of peace. Trump listened to this. I think that's why we saw what happened today. Trump decided to put aside his bad Trump persona and play the good Trump, to stop being the bad cop and act as the good cop. And then Vance is the one who came to explain everything. So that's why today we have this very, very soft, full of goodwill memorandum of understanding, this MOU. But fortunately, Vance gave two rounds of explanations, saying that it's not like what the MOU looks like on the surface. We're not just going to give benefits based on performance. We'll see if they can actually deliver. All right, then. So now, what are the reactions from both sides? Let me talk about that. First of all, the media almost unanimously condemned this MOU. Both left and right-leaning media criticized it, saying it made too many concessions to Iran. Rubio, Lutnick, Haggerty, Ratcliffe, you can see it. None of them are happy. Their displeasure is written all over their faces. At the press conference, there wasn't a single smile the whole time. Many hardliners in the Republican Party are also unhappy. The National Security Advisor, including General Flynn, is not pleased either. Even retired U.S. Army four-star General Keane is unhappy. A lot of big influencers who support Trump are also unhappy. So who exactly is supporting Trump? Well, Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, supports him. And then there's Susan Wills, who supports him, of course. Also, the vice president and this guy Vitakov and Kushner, they all support him. Oh, and there's someone who was against him at first, but later supported him. Who is that? That's Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is the senator from South Carolina. He's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, a U.S. senator. What did he say? He said, I had a long conversation with Witkoff, and after our talk, I believe signing the MOU is beneficial for the United States. Because the Strait of Hormuz will start to open up, and hostile actions against Iran will also come to an end. He said, whether the United States can negotiate with Iran regarding its nuclear program, whether a final agreement can be reached on the nuclear issue and other matters remains to be seen. But I think there's almost no harm in giving it a try. The economic stability brought by opening the strait and ending hostile actions could pave the way for peace that goes far beyond just the Iran conflict. Expanding the Abraham Accords and normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel is the ultimate goal for President Trump and me. Do you get what he means? What he's saying is this. Even though he doesn't have high hopes either, he thinks it's okay to give it a try. Give it a try. There's no harm, nothing to lose. That's what Vance is saying. It's a win-win, right? If it doesn't work, then just go back to fighting as usual, right? But if it does work, wouldn't that be a great thing? And if it does work, not only would Iran change its behavior, but it would also influence the Arab countries. One by one, these countries would join the Abraham Accords platform, normalize relations with Israel, and make the Middle East powder keg disappear for good. That was his and President Trump's ultimate goal. So what I'm trying to say is Vance really did succeed in convincing Trump that we should play the good guy and offer Iran something very generous. While attracting Iran to play the good guy work, in fact, today, a reporter at a press conference in China asked about this. Vance, what do you think the chances are? He said, I don't know. He really did. He was being honest. He said, I don't know. So as you can see, whether it's Vance's attitude or Lindsey Graham, what they both mean is, let's give it a try.